What you are listening to right now is what happens when a group of middle schoolers begs their band director to start a podcast. Apparently, I'm a good storyteller. I don't think that myself. I think some interesting things have happened along the way, but the 11-year-old to 13-year-old age bracket seems to think I am a master storyteller with a way around words. Middle schoolers can be a little weird. They have been begging me since we started school here in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. No, not the beginning of the pandemic, the beginning of the school year during a pandemic. So it's fall. Pandemic's been going on since March, and I've gotten more comfortable sitting in front of a microphone. So my kids think that, well, clearly I am worthy of being on YouTube. Here's the thing. Anybody can be on YouTube. I've seen some really odd things on YouTube, but that is why we are here. The middle schoolers want me here. And so I will appease their requests and see what happens with this first test of the waters, so to speak. My primary goal is to really just talk to the kinds of kids that I work with, which is really every kind of kid, but particularly of a specific age group. I love middle schoolers. I love the independence that they are starting to develop. I love watching them figure out who they are and try out different parts of their personality and their psyche. I like watching them develop, and I like watching them, being able to watch them as they move forward throughout their life and seeing where they end up. I came to teach middle school mostly because I was afraid to teach high school. When I was a high school freshman, my fellow band members tried to kill our band director. Literally, they cut the brake lines to his car. And in that moment, I had already known I wanted to be a band director. I was like, maybe high school's not the best bet for me because there are not many 11-year-olds that know where my brake lines are located. I was still unsure when I got to college, but then I sat down in Elizabeth Hall at Stetson University, which is this beautiful 1800s chapel. It's small. It's not like going into Notre Dame in this big open space. It's small. It's got wooden pews and it's got wooden walls. And when you listen to an ensemble in there, you feel it. The room just vibrates. So I'm sitting in this room and I'm watching this invitational that Dr. Adams decided to host, and they invited Monique McIntyre and her bands to perform. And I was watching, and I looked down at the program and it says First Suite in E flat by Gustav Holst. And immediately I'm like, there's no way. There is no way that this group of middle schoolers is going to play this amazing piece of literature that is typically not played well by a lot of colleges. And they did the first movement, and that was when I decided middle school is for me. Because with a middle school student, they will follow you if you give them a reason to. They will buy into the music if you give them a reason to. And they can outperform anybody. You just have to believe in them. And so many people are like, yeah, this thing drives me nuts, right? So you get a lot of people in the world who go, oh my God, you teach middle school? Oh, I could never do that. Those kids are crazy. I mean, yeah, they're crazy because they're going through all of these changes with their bodies and their hormones. This is not what my students wanted me to talk about, by the way. My students asked me to talk about life in France, but as my students know, I go off on tangents. So here we go, off on a tangent. I don't like it when people say, I can't believe you teach middle school, that must be so difficult. Teaching in general is difficult. Middle schoolers still have this element of play and this element of innocence about them as they are developing into adulthood. And in a lot of ways, by the time you get to 8th grade, many of them are just tiny adults. And they're capable of so much more than a lot of society gives them credit for, because society just goes, oh, puberty, don't deal with those kids. No, middle schoolers are capable of a lot. So my audience is primarily my middle schoolers. And that's why I'm doing this insanity of me sitting in a noisy room with no sound panels. If I hit my desk, the microphone picks it up, but this is a test run, so I'm not editing anything because I'm doing it because a handful of middle schoolers asked me to. So the one thing that the middle schoolers wanted me to talk about was my life in France. And this came about because I invited one of my dearest friends, one of my best friends, to join our class via a Skype session, and we talked about music, education in France, and what he experienced as a middle school student versus what they're experiencing and how those things are different. And then they wanted to know all about France. And so then they asked, well, if you do the podcast, can you make the episodes about France? And I'm like, okay, that's actually not a half bad idea, because when I went to France, it was a very difficult experience in the best way. Going to France and being a part of that culture for me was a dream come true. I just hit my desk and then boom. If you hear random booms, there are not explosions where I live. I live in Central Florida. The worst thing that's going to happen is an alligator is going to walk by my front door, but here I am distracted again. So France was a life-changing experience for me, and it was by the time I went, it was like a 20-year dream come true. I had wanted to go to France since I was in the 3rd grade. And I honestly can't tell you why. I don't know why I love France. I don't know why I'm obsessed with France. It's the only place I ever seem to want to go when I'm on vacation, but of course it's expensive, so I don't go that often. But I'm obsessed with it. So I hit things again. Sorry about that. Boom, boom. Makes it interesting. You never know what's going to happen. Now, if only I could hit the boom, boom in tempo, right? All right, here we go. Moving on. So going to France the first time, this was spring 2010. And I think I left in late January. So in Florida, of course, it wasn't cold. We were already approaching summer months for Florida. But I knew that it was going to be cold when I got to France, because I was flying into Paris in the north of France. It was not a straight flight. I think I went up to New York, and I think I might have also had a stop in Ireland. And then I arrived in Charles de Gaulle, if you will, with my terrible French accent. And I arrived really early in the morning. It had to have been 5 a.m. And I had taken the flight by myself. I knew there were others from my university who were attending. I think there were like 5 or 6 of us who were going, and we had all agreed beforehand that we would take our flights on our own, but we would meet at the train station so we could ride the train together and arrive together in the city of Avignon, which is where I was going to be living, which was in the south. To get from Paris to Avignon, you took a 4-hour bullet train, approximately. It was really actually very interesting. It was very cool. It was the first time ever riding a train, let alone a bullet train, so that was an interesting experience for another episode. But the flight, man, the flight is long, and I didn't sleep because I was uncomfortable, and it was I was excited, and when you're all excited and pent up, you can't sleep. That's just the way it is. You got stress, you got adrenaline going, all sorts of things. So I arrived 5 a.m. in Charles de Gaulle, and I stepped off the plane, and I just immediately was in culture shock because nothing was familiar. I felt like I couldn't read, I felt like I couldn't listen, I just felt alone. And so I step off the plane, I take a few steps, and I notice, okay, there's a gentleman who works for the airline, and I should probably ask him how to find my baggage. Of course, though, I couldn't translate that quickly, and I couldn't think in French yet. So to be able to ask that, I had to stop for a second, and I had to think about all the words, and I put them together. And I nervously went up to him and clearly appeared as though I were an ignorant American, which I am. And I asked him, where do I find baggage claim? And he makes this gesture. His arm sweeps out in front of him, and he seems to be pointing to the entire country of France. And he says, là-bas, Là-bas means over there. His gesture did not indicate to me where over there was. He just said, it's over there. I'm like where over there? Could you be a little bit more specific? But of course I couldn't communicate that because my language skills weren't fast enough. So I wandered là-bas. I went over there. And eventually I found my baggage and I meandered my way down to the train station, which is built inside of the airport. For those of us who have never left Florida, that is an unusual thing. We don't have a great many trains around here, and trains and airports are a new idea. I know they're building one over in the Orlando airport. So I got to the train station, and it's still, 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m. I am exhausted after many, many hours on a plane and trying to navigate, can't think, and now I've realized I have to pee. So I do know the most important phrase that you should know in any language of any country you visit. Where is the bathroom? Où est la toilette? Luckily, I didn't have to ask anybody. It was well marked. But I learned some things in using the bathroom in France for the first time. First, France has somebody, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you walk into a restroom and there's a person who is just there, and it's their job to be there. I had never experienced this. Florida certainly doesn't have that. I've heard about these things in movies and maybe in ritzy hotels in New York and LA, but a toilet attendant. They had a toilet attendant, and the toilet attendant had a jar, and you were supposed to pay money to use the restroom, leave some change to use the restroom, and I didn't have any change. I had like $20 bills. I hadn't exchanged my money yet. So I think I ended up going out and getting a drink and coming back in or something. But I found some change, and I awkwardly put the change in the jar and went into the restroom. And I was grateful because there is nothing more glorious than when a restroom has a door that goes from floor to ceiling and has 3 walls, a fully enclosed stall. That means you have to share the experience with no one else. Now, the next part is important. When you go to a restroom, there are some things that if you leave the country, you should not take for granted. In America, we have toilets, and they have seats. And this is true in every restroom in America I have ever been in. Now, the cleanliness of said toilet and seats is always up for debate. Okay, like, we know there are certain gas stations you don't ask for the restroom key. We know that if you go to the mall, stall doors are going to be a little short. Generally, it's okay. We know these things. We know how to navigate this stuff. So I go into the restroom and I'm not thinking anything about this because every stall has a toilet and a seat. And I sit. Except this toilet did not have a seat. And I fell all the way into the toilet. Now, there are some things that make this way more difficult. Okay, the toilet didn't have a seat. We established that. It was in a train station in January in Charles de Gaulle. If you've never been in a train station, they are open air because they have to have big enough spaces to let the trains come in. In January, in northern France, it was like 20 degrees outside, which means it was 20 degrees in the train station, which means the water that was now on my backside was absolutely ice. Okay, it was the coldest. It was as cold as swimming in Lake Huron up in northern Michigan. It was the coldest water I think I'd ever felt. Now, I've since learned that when you use the restroom in France, you need to check what's going on before you use the restroom because there are a lot of toilet options in France. I have been on toilets with seats. I have been on toilets without seats. I went into the restroom once and found 2 places for my feet and a tiled floor on the ground. No, not tiled floor on the ground, tiled hole in the ground. It was a beautiful hole in the ground. It was well kept, but it was a hole in the ground. And I had no idea how to use that thing. I promptly walked right out. So what is your takeaway from this first story? 1, that I get off topic a lot. 2, I need to buy a shorter cable for my microphones because I keep hitting them and creating popping sounds. I love middle schoolers, and you should always check the toilet before you sit on it.